for example, the question, how can the problem of tragedy of the commons be solved? That doesn't make a lot of sense, to be honest. How can the problem of overfishing be solved? Be an easier way of putting it.
But overfishing being a problem of the tragedy of the commons, because
I don't know what tragedy of the commons means.
Oh, it's when a resource is not owned by any specific owner, like it's not owned by a government or a private industry.
Okay.
So people don't really people don't feel responsible to take care of
okay.
it, so they exploit it.
All right.
Because it's not.
I understand what that means.
Okay.
And I think fish farm a good solution. What fishermen do you think would reduce bycatch? I don't think what they know. I think subsidies have for fish industries. Okay, well, why don't you ask the questions, then I'll respond to them, and you can edit any way you like.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready?
Yeah, we're good.
Do you have a microphone for me?
No, this is a boom mic shotgun, so
Great,
it's
okay.
going right to you.
Terrific. Can you hear me well enough now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Professor Davis, can you tell us about the summary of the current problem?
The current problem of overfishing is one of the great crises of the environment on planet Earth today. The oceans have been and are being overfished to an extent that the fishing industry worldwide is in trouble. And as such, the oceans are in trouble. I think it's pretty common knowledge, for example, of the big game fish, the tuna, the swordfish, the marlin. 90% of the big fish in the oceans have not been fished out. That leaves a reduced population, maybe not one capable of sustaining its own continuance as species. So there are many aspects of overfishing. The principal problem in overfishing is that there are simply too many ships on the sea, too many factory ships on the sea, which have the potential to bring in a day's catch hundreds of thousands of pounds of fish for one vessel in one day in some cases. So the oceans are essentially being vacuumed of fish by the efficient ways in which we look for fish as a food source.
So how can the problem of tragedy of the commons be solved?
That's part of the problem of overfishing is the one that your question alludes to, and that is that we have most of the oceans are international waters, and as such any country has the right to fish in those international waters, and any agreements made to reduce fishing in those waters would require the agreement of all of the parties. There have been attempts, for example, internationally to limit swordfish fishing in I'll have to go back. I'm going to start again. Okay. So let's see. Okay, the problem of overfishing is one related to the internationalism of the oceans. Apart from coastal waters that countries reserve for their own, much of the fishing is done in international waters where any country can fish, and any country can decide not to join groups of other countries in deciding whether or not fishing should be held at the current limits. As an example, several years back, several countries in the North Atlantic agreed to cut down on fishing for cod, which at one time was a wonderfully plentiful fish in the North Atlantic. So the United States and several other countries said we must cut back. And what happened? Nothing, because the other countries that did not participate in that decided, well, it's more easy for us to catch the cod, and as a consequence, the partial international agreement didn't work. There has been very little success with of controlling fishing on an international basis, because basically every country looks out after its own best interests, not the planet's best interests.
So do you think fish farming is a good solution?
Fish farming in some ways is an excellent solution. Aquaculture, as we call it, is now beginning to rival in terms of tonnage of fish each year open ocean fishing. aquaculture in the seas right now, apart from, is mostly shrimp and salmon. And I'm not convinced at all that salmon aquaculture is good for the oceans, and nor do I think that it's good for the kind of salmon that we eat that is farm raised. I think the best aquaculture is that on land, in ponds where fish such as tilapia or catfish can be fed grain, not the marine aquaculture, for example, salmon, where fish have to be caught and ground up to make the food for the salmon. So we're raising more Atlantic salmon, but we're overfishing the small fish, the sardines, the mackerels, the herrings, and grinding them up to feed the salmon. That's an unsustainable process. And so my feeling is aquaculture for salmon, which is the main marine aquaculture for fish right now, will decline in the near future. It can't sustain, because they can't sustain the production of food for those fish.
Mm. So what fishing method do you think would reduce bycatch?
Bycatch is, as you know, it's the consequence of catching fish and then finding species or kinds of animals, in some cases, that are not fish, that you don't want. And so bycatch is usually thrown over the side of the deck. One of the worst causes of bycatch is the longline fishing behind ships, where the bycatch includes such things as sea turtles, which are in some areas nearing extinction, albatross, seabirds, and those creatures rarely survive when they're pulled up after being hooked for days, pulled up on the deck of a ship. Another source of bycatch which needs to be controlled is the bottom trawling, where heavy steel nets are drug across the seafloor, and they basically scrape up anything living on the seafloor or living near it in terms of fish. Particular fish might be looked for, like red snapper, and then everything else, when it's brought up to the deck of the ship, is simply thrown overboard, and in most cases dead or dying. So I would say cut back or eliminate long line fishing and bottom trawling.
So how effective are they now? What potential do you think subsidies have for fishing industries?
The fishing industry, I think, is basically an industry with numbered days. The major oceans, Pacific, Atlantic, have been overfished. The Mediterranean is greatly overfished. The things that sustain the fishing industry now, apart from aquaculture, is going to more Arctic waters where fishing hadn't been done before, or the Indian Ocean, which has relatively escaped the heavy fishing. But it's only a matter of time before the worldwide fishing industry crashes. Perhaps 10, 20 years, but the present catch from the world oceans is unsustainable.
Can I ask a question? Sorry. When you think about like giving subsidies to fishermen so they won't fish, so that we can help the populations.
The United States has been giving subsidies to fishermen on the West Coast, for example, to basically go out of business, or to not fish to the extent that they have been. That has been helpful to the West Coast, but the idea of subsidies to fishermen to not fish, I think that perhaps the best thing is to let the fishermen who can't fish find other means of employment.